Chapter 2671. Chinmu glared at him, picked up her bag, and got up. When she walked out, she was still a little hesitant and put her beautiful fingers on her lower abdomen. Pregnant? Could she really be pregnant? It was hard for her to imagine that this child was Guze's. She was pregnant after just one time? She had mixed feelings and hesitated for a long time before walking to the obstetrics and gynecology department. Qin Shun had already informed her, so she went straight to the blood test. In less than half an hour, the familiar doctor told her in a trembling voice, "Congratulations, Miss Qin, you are pregnant." As for the congratulations, it was Dr. Qin Chen's request that the child should receive blessings from the moment it was in the womb. Although she was a little uncomfortable, the female doctor still said it. Qin Mu's expression was still blank. She looked at the doctor for a long time before saying, "Really pregnant? There's no mistake?" A blood test is the most reliable way. There's no mistake. If Miss Qin is still worried, you can come back in a month to listen to the baby's heartbeat. At that time, the cute little baby will start to beat, and the sound will be very beautiful, the doctor said, and his skin was about to fall off. Qin Mu couldn't listen to it anymore. "I understand." The doctor smiled and prescribed a bottle of folic acid for her, and also put a pregnant woman's note in her hand. "This is your first child, so pay special attention to maintain a happy mood." Qin Mu gritted her teeth. "I will." She walked out as if she was escaping. This doctor was a big mouth. In a few days, probably all of East City would know that she and Qin Mu were pregnant after the divorce. She bit her lip and walked in the clean corridor of the hospital. After walking for a while, she twisted her ankle, but it wasn't very serious. However, she stopped and looked at the high heels on her feet. Then she took them off and walked barefoot. She remembered that pregnant women couldn't wear high heels. If she fell, Qin Mu held the high heels in one hand and stood in the corridor of the hospital, gently touching her belly. She felt that it was very magical that she was actually pregnant. She thought that she would never be a mother in this life. She had never thought of aborting the child. No matter who the father was, she was the child's mother. She was going to be a mother. At that moment, Qin Mu was so happy that she wanted to jump up. What magical thing! Just as she lowered her gaze, a slender figure slowly walked up to her. The man's gaze landed on the pregnant woman's notice in her hand. Then he asked hoarsely, "You're pregnant?" Qin Mu's body froze. She raised her eyes and looked at the man in front of her. It was Guze. He knew. She looked at him, and he did the same. Then, he carried her in his arms. Before she could protest, he said in a low voice, "You'll catch a cold if you're barefoot." "Don't you know that pregnant women shouldn't catch a cold?" Qin Mu bit her lip. "I'm not pregnant." Guze's deep gaze fell on her little face. Without saying a word, he carried her to the parking lot outside. He put her on the passenger seat and said in a low voice, "I have something to tell you." I said, "I'm not pregnant." Qin Mu emphasized again, "Guze, don't be like this." He placed his hands on both sides of her seat and looked straight into her eyes. He said slowly, "Then let's go to the hospital for a check, okay?" Qin Mu shut up, but after a while, she whispered, "The child isn't yours." Chapter 2672. He looked at her and said slowly, "You have another man?" Her face blushed, unable to say it out loud. Guze let her go and buckled her seatbelt before starting the car. She realized that he was driving very slowly. Even though it wasn't rush hour and he could drive a little faster, he was still driving carefully at 40 kilometers per hour. After going through a few streets, he parked the car in a high-end neighborhood. He lived in a 4-story bungalow with 2 units on each floor. Each unit took up about 300 square meters of land. Guze opened the car door and got out, still wanting to carry her. Even though Qin Mu refused, he insisted. He carried her to his house. It was huge, much bigger than Qin Chen's apartment. However, it was clearly a place for a single man. There wasn't a single part of it that was gentle and beautiful. Guze carried her and walked to the innermost room. He opened the door and carried her in. She thought that it would be his study room or something since he said he had something to talk to her about. However, she didn't expect it to be a studio. There were all sorts of photos hanging on the walls, but every single one of them was of her. Some of them she couldn't even remember where they were, but they were all captured beautifully. Chinmu looked at them in a daze before looking at Guzei. I took them all. You can come down and take a look. There's a carpet in here. He put her down and stood beside her. Chinmu looked at them one by one. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't shocked. These photos spanned across her entire teenage years, and even included her and Zhou Chengwang after their marriage. Chinmu, these are my 8 years. Guzei's voice rang out faintly. 8 years that I couldn't control. He looked at her. If your marriage with Zhou Chengwang was even a little blissful, I wouldn't have shown you my dark thoughts. But now, he placed one hand on her waist and the other on her stomach. You're pregnant. Chinmu, I can't let you make your own decisions anymore. With that, he gently hugged her and whispered in her ear, Mumu, let me take care of you and the child. Chinmu's eyes were a little hot, and her body was a little stiff. Yes, the person who had sex with her was Guzei, but she didn't feel like he was the father of the child. Even though he had given her so much warmth, she still didn't feel it. Subconsciously, she felt that the child was hers alone. Perhaps it was because she had no recollection of the process of making the child. So this child had appeared out of nowhere. Her little face was forced to rest on his shoulder. She was in a daze for a long time. Guzei continued, Chinmu, say it okay? His feelings were a little complicated, but ever since he found out that she was pregnant, he had done it without thinking. Not only did he love her, he really wanted to take care of her. And that child. Perhaps in the future, they would have another child, and he would raise this child as his own. In the future, even if Chinmu hated him, he wouldn't regret it. He couldn't refuse. Chinmu didn't say anything. Her heart was in a mess. After a long time, she gently pushed Guzei away and said with difficulty, Guzei, I can't be with you because of child. I need to think about it. Chapter 2673. Chinmu pursed her lips and didn't want to answer. He knew the answer. He had always been gentle to her, but at this moment, he was unusually strong. He took a step forward and pulled her into his arms. Ignoring her struggle, he said in a low voice, Don't move. The child is still young. Chinmu's body froze for a moment, and she didn't dare to move anymore. Guzei kept hugging her and said softly, No matter what you think, I have to take care of the birth of this child. He held her shoulders and said seriously, I'm the father of the child, aren't I? Chinmu was stunned and didn't say anything for a long time. It's a deal. He smiled. From today onwards, move here. I'll send you to work, have lunch together, and pick you up after work. Also, if you don't feel well, you can stay at home. I can help you deal with some things. He said it very firmly. For the first time, she knew that Guzei was such a strong man. For a moment, she was speechless. Are you stupid? He smiled and reached out to touch her hair. You can think about it during the whole pregnancy. Do you want to accept my proposal, or do you want to raise this child together? There was a faint threat in his words, as if he wanted to drag it out with her to the end. If she didn't agree, there would be a dispute after the child was born. Chinmu frowned. Guzei, I need to think about it. I'll give you time to think about it, he said as he leaned over and kissed her hair. Chinmu looked up. No, I can't move to live here. What did it look like moving here? It was more like living together. His eyes were burning. Then I'll move to your place. I just don't know if Qinshin will mind. After all, it's her house, isn't it? It seemed that he only gave her 2 choices. Chinmu looked down. After a long time, she said in a low voice, Guzei, I will consider our relationship. Please don't force me, okay? She took a deep breath. I haven't forgotten about Zhou Chengwang. At that moment, Guzei's expression was rather ugly. His thin lips were tightly pursed, but it only took a moment for him to regain his composure. He stroked her long hair and said, I know. Chinmu looked at him uneasily and slowly expressed her thoughts. Actually, you don't have to force yourself to take responsibility. I will give birth to the child and you can take care of him. Guzei, you can even get married. This child won't affect anything. His gaze turned cold. He thought he knew what she was thinking. What she meant was that he had no choice but to raise a child by himself. However, he felt somewhat bitter in his heart. The child was indeed not his. Guzei, you're just using that misunderstanding to force her to be with you. It's good enough that she's able to speak her mind to you. His expression was ugly, but he still nodded. Okay, then you live by yourself. I'll drive you. She still wanted to say something, but he interrupted her. Chin-moo, this is my biggest concession. Chin-moo thought about it seriously and nodded gently. Okay. He stroked her cheek with his palm. His voice was a little hoarse. Also, promise me that you will consider our relationship, okay? She looked at him for a long time before she nodded again. Guze smiled and pinched her cheek. His voice was hoarse. I'll go cook. You probably want to eat something light. Chin-moo smiled. Guze turned around and was about to leave when he walked back. Chapter 2674. He pressed one hand on her shoulder, leaned over, and kissed the corner of her mouth lightly. Chin-moo couldn't avoid it, so she didn't move. Guze murmured, Chin-moo, I'm very happy. Chin-moo looked at him with a confused expression, and he looked into her eyes. In her eyes, he saw the shadow of Zhou Chengwang. However, it didn't matter. He could wait. He had waited for 8 years for this day. He believed that they could be together. Guze gently caressed her eyelids a few times, his eyes filled with endless love. He did like her, so he didn't care about this child. He could tell from her expression how much she liked children, so, as long as she liked it, he could accept it. He wasn't a young boy anymore. He knew what he wanted. Guze smiled and said in a hoarse voice, I'm going to cook. You stay here for a while. If you want to go out, there are slippers at the door. Remember not to go barefoot. Chin-moo grunted in acknowledgement. She didn't remember where she had read that pregnant women were easily moved and less guarded. She didn't know if she belonged to this category now. She would be particularly moved by what Guze did for her. It wasn't to the point of being moved, but she didn't want to refuse. She stood there, looking at the photos he had taken for her, looking at the man who had loved her for 8 years. It would be a lie to say that she didn't have any thoughts, but she was still a little confused. Her relationship with Zhou Chengwang came so hastily, but it ended in heartache. She didn't want it to be the same with Guze. Yes, he loved her, was very tolerant of her, and was very good to her. But she didn't love him, so it was unfair to him. Chin-moo thought about this and felt that he had to wait for Guze to calm down before having a good talk with him. In the kitchen, Guze took the tablet and made a series of pregnant meals. He planned to make one meal tonight and go to the supermarket tomorrow to buy some ingredients. Chin-moo was too thin. She had been in a bad mood before, so her complexion wasn't particularly good. Now that she was pregnant, she should nourish herself well. He heard from her assistant that she was retching, so he guessed that she didn't have a good appetite. After thinking about it, he finally decided to make her a seafood porridge with a light flavor. He did it skillfully and didn't notice that Chin-moo had quietly walked in. She stood in the kitchen doorway watching, head cocked to one side. Guze was a good man. He was a good man at home, and when he was outside, he was also good. He was also the father of her child. Chin-moo felt that it should not be difficult to like him. However, perhaps because she was old, it was hard for her to rekindle the fire of infatuation with Zhou Chengwang like before. She smiled faintly and then remembered that she was only 23 years old. If she and Guze were together, would they be an old married couple? Would Guze get tired of a wife who was always calm and unperturbed? So for his own good, she had to think it through carefully. When Guze noticed her presence, he turned his handsome face sideways. She smiled and said, The photos you take are very good. If the company closes down in the future, you can open a photo studio. He glanced at her. I think you can help rich women take artistic photos. That way, you can earn money faster. After all, it's not easy to raise a family. Chin-moo laughed. Guze, when did you become so immoral? He looked at her and said softly, Not when I fell in love with a married woman. She was sad. Chapter 2675. She looked up and smiled. It doesn't matter. I haven't agreed to be with you yet, so you can say it. If we get together one day, there's no need to say these things anymore. He smiled back and went back to cook the seafood porridge for her. When she sat at the dining table and tasted it carefully, Guze was actually a little nervous. He was afraid that she wouldn't like it and that she wouldn't have an appetite. Chin-moo held the spoon and sniffed it. Then, she looked up at him and said lightly, It smells good. He smiled back. It's good that you like it. Try it. Because she didn't have a good appetite, he put in something light. Qin smiled and took a sip. It did taste good. Then, she drank the porridge in small bites. It was warm and sweaty, but it was indescribably comfortable. Guze asked softly, "Do you want another bowl?" She shook her head. "No, I'm afraid I'll vomit if I eat too much." Guze nodded understandingly. "That's good. Let's have some fruit tonight." Qin grunted in acknowledgement. She sat and watched him eat the porridge calmly. He drank unhurriedly and occasionally looked up at her. When their eyes met, Qin would smile. Guze couldn't help but reach out and rub her long hair. "You look a little silly." She didn't avoid him, but she didn't give him too much of a response. Her feelings for him were at most a comfortable friend. She didn't hate him. She didn't have any more feelings for him. As for the baby's father, her fingers touched her belly. It was still hard for her to accept that she was pregnant with Guze's child. It was still hard for her to imagine the baby coming out with Guze's face. However, she didn't say these words. She had been drugged back then, and Guze, well, he had worked hard to help her get rid of it. Qin was a little sleepy when she was pregnant. Later, Guze arranged for her to sit on the sofa. When he cleaned up the kitchen, she accidentally fell asleep. When Guze was done with everything and quietly walked back to the living room, he saw Qin sleeping on the sofa with her little face slanted. His brown hair was spread out at his side, and his face was buried in his hair, looking a little pale. Sighing in his heart, he slowly walked over and knelt beside her. He lifted her long hair with his large hands and stared at her exquisite facial features. Qin was still very young. There was not a trace of age on her face. He vaguely remembered that she was only 23 years old. He ran his fingers through her long hair, feeling its smoothness. He had desired her for so long, and now she was right in front of him. Guze couldn't help but lean over and gently touch the corner of her mouth. Qin didn't wake up, but the corners of her mouth curled up as if she was having a good dream. His slender fingers tickled her, and he smiled faintly. Then, he gently picked her up and walked to the master bedroom. He didn't even think about it. She would be his in the future, so it was normal for them to be intimate. Qin body was very soft and light, so he easily carried her back to the master bedroom. When he placed her on the soft bed, she seemed to wake up for a moment, and her slender arms wrapped around his neck. At that moment, Guze was ecstatic. He looked down at the person in his arms and saw that her eyes were still closed, and she looked lazy. Chapter 2676. Perhaps because she was not used to it, Qin voice sounded like a kitten. "Zhou Chengguang, don't be like this. I want to sleep." She buried her face in the pillow and opened her red lips slightly. Her voice was husky and very charming. "Stop fooling around." Guze's tense body froze. She called out Zhou Chengguang's name. If Guze did not know how important Zhou Chengguang was to her in the past, he knew it now. He was still kneeling on both sides of her body and did not lift his body for a long time, quietly watching her little face in deep sleep. After a long time, he smiled bitterly and slowly straightened his body. He held her slippers and removed them for her. His movements were very gentle. Finally, he covered her with a thin blanket and kissed her cheek before leaving the master bedroom. At night, on the balcony, Guze stood in the dark with a little red dot between his fingers. He also stood quietly. He did not know how many cigarettes he had smoked, but he knew that he needed to smoke to calm down. Qin pregnancy was a turning point for him, but it seemed that he was even more hesitant. He rubbed his forehead with the cigarette between his fingers and smiled bitterly. In the past, he had seen Yimuyun's excessive love for Tang Sher. It was almost twisted and domineering, and he found a little unbelievable. Now, he had seen it for himself again. Yimuyun's sister was not bad either. Her persistence was comparable to Yimuyun's. Guze laughed softly, a little self-deprecating. However, he still did not want to give up. It was Zhou Chengguang who gave up. He was just following his heart. No one else could take care of Qin as well as he did. Guze extinguished the cigarette and walked slowly back to the master bedroom. He took his bathrobe and took a shower. When he came out, he hesitated for a moment, but he still lifted the blanket and lay down beside her. Even if he could not do anything, he could only hold her shoulders and kiss her neck. He thought that slowly she would get used to his presence, get used to his care, and forget that person. The night was getting darker. Guze had a sleepless night. On the other hand, Qin Mu slept all the way until dawn. When she opened her eyes, she saw Guze's enlarged, handsome face. His breathing stagnated, and his body unconsciously retreated. Before she fell off the bed, Guze held her slender waist and said in a slightly nervous voice, "Be careful." Qin Mu was also shocked. For a moment, her face was expressionless, and she looked a little confused. She was originally a little girl. When she woke up early in the morning, her hair was a mess. It was not very pleasing to the eye, but it was the way he liked it. Guze smiled and tightened his arms. Her body leaned against him. He could feel that she was struggling for a moment, but he didn't care. He planted a light kiss on her forehead and said softly, "You fell asleep on the sofa last night, so I didn't wake you up. Do you mind sleeping in my bed for a night?" It was a little pretentious for Qin Mu to say that she minded. They had already slept together, so what else was there to say? She pursed her lips and smiled, choosing not to answer. Guze sat up. "Are you going to the art gallery today?" Qin Mu leaned against the headboard and thought for a moment. "I want to rest for the day." "That's good." He leaned over and kissed her. "I'll go make breakfast. Sleep a little longer, and I'll take you to the hospital later." Qin Mu widened her eyes. "Why are we going to the hospital?" Chapter 2677. Guze kissed the corner of her mouth and said with a faint smile, "Miss Qin, it's my first time too." He said it so seriously that Qin Mu couldn't do anything about it. After looking at him for a long time, she said in a low voice, "Then go." She had been too anxious yesterday, and she was a little ashamed. After all, she was a divorced woman. Pregnancy wouldn't be a glorious thing, so there were a lot of things she didn't ask clearly. She would rather ask a professional doctor than ask Qin Shen. When Guze was about to leave, Qin Mu grabbed his arm and said in a low voice, "Let's go to another hospital. Xingyuan, there are a lot of acquaintances there." A hint of a smile appeared in Guze's eyes. Then, he reached out and touched her head. "Okay." There was a touch of love in his voice. It wasn't that she couldn't hear it, but she chose to ignore it. Guze's eyes fell on her face quietly. After a while, he got up to make breakfast. Qin Mu lay down, but she didn't fall asleep again. She put her fingers on her belly and quietly spaced out. Child and Guze's child. She still didn't feel it was real. She quietly spaced out in the morning light. After a long time, she felt a little warm at the corner of her eyes. She reached out and touched it. It was wet and warm. What did she cry? Qin Mu stared blankly. She pursed her lips and bit her fist. She couldn't control herself, and tears fell from the corner of her eyes. She didn't know what was wrong with her. Maybe pregnant women just like to cry. But she knew that it was an excuse for herself. She's missing someone. She was pregnant with Guze's child, and thinking about Zhou Chengwang was a sin. But she couldn't help it. Pregnancy reminded her of the days when she desperately wanted child. Those days were indelible memories of her and Zhou Chengwang's lives. She felt extremely useless and disappointing. "Qin Mu, you said that you wanted an important start, but now you're like this. It's embarrassing." She clenched her fists and desperately tried to suppress it. After a long time, she finally restrained herself and wanted to go to the bathroom to wash her face and see if her eyes were red. She didn't want Guze to see her like this. This was hurting him, and she vaguely knew it. However, as soon as she moved, she saw Guze standing at the bedroom door. There were clear tears on her face. She didn't have time to clean them up and just stared at him blankly. Guze's eyes were a bit deep. He quietly looked at her for a while and then smiled. "Do you want to drink soy milk? If you want to drink it, I can grind it." Qin Mu nodded. "Okay." Guze smiled again and didn't say anything. He turned around and left as if he didn't see the tears in the corner of her eyes. Qin Mu lowered her head. She knew that he was pretending not to see it. That was good. They both had face. She quickly went to clean herself up. When she walked out, she saw that Guze had already prepared breakfast. She sat down, picked up the handmade soy milk, and took a sip. Her gentleness probably had some kind of ingratiating meaning. Guzay looked at her and ate breakfast silently. After breakfast, it was already 8:30. He raised his hand to look at the time and smiled. I'm driving to the hospital now. It's about 9 o'clock. There shouldn't be many people. Chimu nodded. Chapter 2678. He was afraid of scaring her away. She wanted to keep her distance, so she became so awkward. Guzay took the car keys and a thin jacket to put on her shoulders. It's windy outside. Use it to block the wind. She replied with an "oh" and didn't refuse. Anyway, after the checkup, she would tell him that she was going home. They could take it slow. She couldn't accept living together like this. Guzay's thoughts were different from hers. He wanted to convince her to live together. On one hand, it was to nurture their relationship. On the other hand, he really wanted to take care of her. Also, he wanted to be with her. He couldn't bear to see her suffer even the slightest bit of rumors. He wanted to let others know that the child had a father. Guzay got into the car and looked at her sideways. He smiled faintly and drove to the People's Hospital of B City. This was the hospital that Chin Mu had designated. She said that it was a public hospital, so it was not easy to bump into someone familiar. He thought that it was true. Most of the people in her circle went to expensive private hospitals. It was unlikely that she would bump into someone familiar in a public hospital. An hour later, the car stopped in the parking lot. The sun was scorching and the wind was quite strong. Chin Mu felt that the jacket was still useful. She wore a hat to block the sun. After walking for about 2 minutes, they entered the clinic building. Guzay let her sit on the bench while he went to register for the obstetrics and gynecology department. There were a lot of people registering. He queued for about 10 minutes. Chin Mu looked at Guzay for a while before retracting his gaze. Then he lowered his gaze and looked at his stomach. Her stomach was very flat. If it wasn't for the checkup, she wouldn't have believed that there was a child inside. Chin Mu reached out and touched her stomach gently. Her expression was very gentle. Hello, little one. Of course, she was silly. The little one in her stomach was still too small to respond to her. She touched it again. I'm a mother. As she said that, she laughed. So this was how pregnancy felt. It was beautiful. Chin Mu felt that she was really not picky because she was too desperate. She was really not picky about the child's father when she was pregnant. It seemed that no matter whose child it was a treasure and she had to give birth to it. In her heart, she loved this child very much. Just being pregnant made her feel very happy. Chin Mu's little happiness was seen by the man in the corridor. Zhou Chengwang had lost a lot of weight. He stood not far away and looked at Chin Mu in shock. He was very familiar with her expression. This was how a woman looked when she was pregnant. She looked forward to the arrival of a little life, and the love on her face could not be concealed. The blood in his entire body was almost frozen. Only his brain could operate sluggishly, and only a few words could be written in his head. Chin Mu was pregnant. She was pregnant. Was it Guzay's child? Even if he and she had once that day, but he did not dare to believe that it was his seed. They had tried so many times in the past, but they had never gotten pregnant recently. He heard that Guzay was chasing after her, and they ended up together and had a child so soon. Zhou Chengguang looked at the expression on her face greedily, and his fingers clenched into a fist. Zhou Chengguang, you should be happy for her. She is pregnant, and she has always wanted a child. She has a child with Guzay, and she has a complete family. She is a complete woman, and Mumu is very good. She will also treat Shuemu well. He lowered his eyes and thought bitterly, this really couldn't be any better. Chapter 2679. Zhou Chengguang just watched, and watched for a long time before he smiled softly. Then, he saw Guzay slowly walking back. Guzay bent down and whispered to Chin Mu. He saw Guzay's expression was very gentle. Chin Mu raised her head and kept looking at Guzay. Her eyes were also very focused. They looked like the most ordinary couple in the world. Zhou Chengguang's eyes were a little hot. Yes, they were together. Moreover, with Guzay's age, it was expected that he was eager to get married. As for the child, it was probably an accident. It was a pleasant surprise. Soon, they would get married. Zhou Chengguang took a step back and hid in the darkness of the corridor. His face was a little desolate. His tightly closed eyes showed the struggle and pain in his heart. After a long time, he slowly walked out, but Qin Mu and Guze were nowhere to be seen. Thinking about it, they must have gone upstairs for a checkup. Zhou Chengwang clenched his fingers. At his fingertips, there was a test report on which was the latest condition of his body. The doctor's words were gentle but cruel. "Mr. Zhou, your illness can't be delayed any longer. The hospital is looking for a suitable liver source, but they haven't found the right one yet. I know Mr. Zhou has your own connections. You should also try your best." The doctor paused. "Mr. Zhou, you know that time waits for no man. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, we don't want to give up. Mr. Zhou, don't give up either." The doctor looked at the man in front of him. The man who once appeared in all the major financial magazines was full of vigor. But now he was full of fatigue and lost weight after the illness. Originally, he should have been hospitalized. However, Zhou Chengwang insisted on not being hospitalized. He requested to take conservative medicine for treatment. It should be known that it was far from enough. If he didn't wait for a suitable liver source, he might already be dead. Zhou Chengwang's fingers clenched the test report. He smiled softly. Now, he could calmly wait for death. In this world, the people and things that he was reluctant to part with no longer belonged to him. He raised his eyes and looked at the blazing white lights on the ceiling of the hospital. He smiled a little desolately. "Mumu, we'll be fine, right?" At this moment, a large hand grabbed his shoulder, and the test report in his hand was forcibly taken away. Startled, he lowered his head and saw Zhao Zi's furious and pained face. "Chengwang, you're crazy." Zhao Zi looked at the test report quickly and pursed his thin lips tightly. "You don't want to live anymore, do you?" Therefore, she hid herself and lived in the house that she used to live with Qin Mu. She didn't see anyone and didn't care about the company's affairs. The Zhou Chengwang he knew was not like this. He followed him and finally understood the reason. Liver disease, late stage. Zhou Chengwang smiled faintly and gently snatched the test report. He tore it into pieces and threw it away. "As you can see, it's the late stage. There's no difference whether we treat him or not. The difference is that you don't want to live anymore." Zhao Zi's eyes were full of pain. "Chengwang, you weren't like this in the past. If you like Qin Mu, go get her. What are you doing? Do you want Qin Mu to shed a few tears in front of your grave after you die?" Chapter 2680. Then try your best to cure yourself. You have money, and sometimes money isn't everything. It just happens to be able to exchange for a life. Zhao Zi grabbed his collar and raised his body rudely. Zhou Chengwang still looked at Zhao Zi quietly and suddenly laughed softly. And then Zhao Zi saw that Zhou Chengwang's eyes were filled with warmth, an expression that Zhao Zi had never seen before. Zhou Chengwang murmured, "Zi, she's pregnant. She's pregnant with Guze's child. Tell me, how can I compete with Guze?" With that, his thin lips raised into a smile that was uglier than crying. "When I recover, she'll have given birth to a child." Zhao Zi was stunned, and his hand loosened. He stared blankly at Zhou Chengwang, and his body suddenly took 2 steps back. His eyes were fixed on Zhou Chengwang. Zhou Chengwang took out another cigarette from his pocket and smoked quietly. Zhao Zi's voice was hoarse and hoarse. "Are you crazy? Why are you smoking at this time? Don't you want to live anymore?" "Yes, I don't want to live anymore." Zhou Chengwang smiled faintly. "There's no point in living anymore." The flesh on Zhao Zi's face twitched a few times. Then he walked over, clenched his hand into a fist, and forcefully punched Zhou Chengwang's shoulder. His voice carried a hint of coldness. "Zhou Chengwang, what is this? What is this, huh? We grew up together, and we created this glorious era together. You say you don't want to live anymore. Is it worth it for a woman?" With that, he fiercely punched Zhou Chengwang's face to the side. "Zhou Chengwang, are you worthy of me? You risked your life for Tang Share, and now for Qin Mu, you don't even want a brother. Is that it?" Zhou Chengwang's body fell heavily on the wall, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood, but he didn't care at all. With trembling hands, he brought the cigarette to his lips and took a deep breath. "Is there only a woman in your heart? Is a woman everything to you? Zhao Zi's voice was hoarse. Our brotherhood, our glory, the days we grew up together, are they nothing to you? With that, he stepped forward and held his neck. His face was almost distorted. Do you want to die? It's easy to die if you want to. Come, let's go to the rooftop together and jump down together. We'll die a clean death. Tomorrow, we can even go on social news together. Director Zhou's true love is me. How sensational would that be? It's much better than you waiting for death in silence. Zhao Zi's voice was very fierce, but there was a drop of tear in the corner of his eye, but it didn't fall. Zhou Chengwang coughed violently, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. He closed his eyes weakly and smiled. Z, why do you have to bet your life on me? Why didn't I know you like men? I like them now. It's none of your business. Zhao Zi's voice was even more hoarse, and it was almost like a rascal, as if he had returned to the time when they were in their 20s. They had disputes, they fought, and it was always him who was unreasonable, while Zhou Chengwang was always the one who gave in to him. This time, he wanted to be the same. Zhou Chengwang laughed, and he tilted his head. You like me, but you still hit me? Zhao Zi was in tears. He wiped his tears and laughed self-deprecatingly, hitting his affection, scolding his love. I've never heard of it. Chapter 2681. Zhou Chengwang looked into his eyes and said softly, Z, I'll leave the glory to you, okay? I have nothing left but glory. Okay, let's get married in America. Your assets will be mine. If you can't do it and still don't give up on Qin Mu, then don't fucking talk about death. Zhao Zi grabbed his collar again roughly. Just fucking live. Zhou Chengwang didn't resist and couldn't resist. He was a patient now. He looked at Zhao Zi and smiled faintly. Z, when did you become so rude? When you said you were going to give me all your assets. Zhao Zi was still holding his collar, and his expression wasn't very good. Then he stared at him coldly. What do you say? Zhou Chengwang looked at his serious face and couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was probably because he laughed too hard that he suddenly coughed out a mouthful of blood. He looked very pathetic. Zhao Zi was angry at first, so he was especially rude. But seeing him like this, he finally couldn't bear to let him go and patted his back. How are you? I'm fine. It's an old illness. Zhou Chengwang said and wanted to smoke again. But Zhao Zi took the cigarette away from his hand. You're still smoking at this time. I don't want to be your widow. Zhou Chengwang glared at him and then reached out to touch Zhao Zi's forehead. It's not hot. Z, do you have some other illness? Or were you hurt by a girl? You hurt me. Zhao Zi, he said unhappily, and then dragged Zhou Chengwang out. Let's go. I'll take care of you from now on. This hospital won't come anymore. He knew that seeing Qin Mu, Zhou Chengwang would probably feel bad. This illness couldn't be cured even if he wanted to. Zhou Chengwang smiled faintly. You really want to marry me? Can your mom accept me as her son-in-law? Who was Zhao Zi? He was the brother he grew up with. He glared at him and said, You wish. Based on your current situation, you deserve to be my mother's daughter-in-law. Zhou Chengwang laughed and coughed at the same time. I regret it, Z. Zhao Zi threw him into the car and got in again. He looked at him sideways. What are you regretting? With that said, he started the car. The meaning in Zhou Chengwang's eyes was unclear. I should have married you back then. Then, the car with good performance floated for a moment, but Zhao Zi quickly turned it around. He looked at the man beside him meaningfully. You're sick in the liver, but your brain is fine. I'm straight. As he spoke, he laughed again. I'll treat you well. After I recover, maybe I'll consider you. Zhou Chengwang just smiled. After a long time, he closed his eyes and said softly, Let me know when Z gets home. I'm a little tired, and thank you. At this time, it was quite good to have someone accompany him. He even thought that if Qin Mu got married, and he brought Z to tell her that he and Z were together, would she be surprised? That expression would definitely be very cute. Also, if Z knew that he was thinking like this, would he beat him up? The corner of Zhou Chengwang's mouth curled up slightly, and his handsome face had lost a lot of weight. Chapter 2682. The white sports car sped on the road to Be City and slowly drove to the quiet private driveway. Zhou Chengwang was now living in the villa that he and Qin Mu used to live in. He didn't hire many servants, so the villa was very quiet. When Zhao Zi parked the car, he looked at him sideways. Seeing that he was sleeping soundly, he didn't disturb him and sat quietly in the car to wait. Zhou Chengwang was a big man, so it was naturally inconvenient for him to carry him in. Even if Zhou Chengwang's current weight should be no more than 110 kilograms, Zhao Zi felt that it was enough for him to think of that scene. He sat for a long time, about an hour before Zhou Chengwang woke up. As soon as he opened his eyes, he heard a very faint voice beside him. "Haven't you slept well recently?" Zhou Chengwang slowly sat up straight, and his voice was a little unnatural. "How did you know?" Zhao Zi turned his face and looked into his eyes. "You used to be a vigilant person. You wouldn't fall asleep when someone was driving." Zhou Chengwang smiled. "My body isn't very good." "Chengwang, why torture yourself?" Zhao Zi said softly. "Listen to me and treat your illness well. Can we talk about Qinmu later? At worst, you still have a memory. If you are gone, the memory will be gone." Zhou Chengwang was slightly stunned. Zhao Zi suddenly took out a stack of photos from the cabinet in front of him and handed them to Zhou Chengwang. "I came to you for this." Zhou Chengwang took it and looked at it. What he saw were pictures of mangled flesh and blood. He was stunned for a moment and could guess who the owner of the photos was. There was no warmth in Zhao Zi's voice. It was even cruel. "I don't think you'll be happy that she turned herself into Qin Mu. Furthermore, she's also the person who indirectly harmed Gumei. The way she is now is pretty good. Also, she's living in the house that Gumei used to live in. Gumei's photos are everywhere. Chi went crazy after being locked up for a day." Zhou Chengwang didn't want to hear the rest of the conversation. He raised his hand and closed his eyes. His voice sounded tired. "Z, I feel like I had a very long dream." "Then do it. Don't wake up. Whether the future is good or bad, at least I'm still here." Zhao Zi smiled and punched him. "Isn't that right? I'm still here." Zhou Chengwang opened his eyes and looked into Zhao Zi's eyes. Zhao Zi said softly, "Chengwang, you don't have nothing. You still have me. You still have the love that Qin Mu once had. You still have Shuemu. You gave him to Gu Zhe and Qin Mu, but you're still his father." Zhou Chengwang looked at Zhao Zi for a long time and smiled faintly. He didn't say anything, but Zhao Zi knew that Chengwang probably didn't want to die. He let out a long sigh in his heart. In this day and age, if you want to convince someone, you have to pretend to be rotten. In a hospital, Qin Mu and Gu Zhe were both sitting there. The doctor looked at the test results from yesterday and raised his delicate eyebrows. "She's pregnant." Then he looked at Gu Zhe and then at Qin Mu. "Husband and wife?" Qin Mu shook her head. Chapter 2683. The female doctor placed the form in Gu Zhe's hand and smiled meaningfully. "It's much more troublesome than making a child." Gu Zhe looked at the abortion form in his hand, then at the female doctor. Her bright red nails and lipstick, and then her overly low neckline and slightly picky gaze. He leaned over and gently stuffed the test form into the female doctor's collar. Junyan leaned over and said, "Miss, I'm not married. She's my girlfriend, but I'm preparing to get married." His lips were very close, and he almost whispered, "Your attitude at work is like taking revenge on society." After saying that, he held Qin Mu's small hand under the female doctor's dumbfounded expression and said in an indisputable tone, "Go to the private hospital. I'm not going to Xinyuan." Qin Mu had one last insistence. Gu Zhe tilted his head to look at her and ruffled her hair. "Listen to me on this." Qin Mu stood face to face with him. She looked at his handsome face and listened to his voice. For a moment, she was in a daze. Listened to him, this feeling overlapped with the past. She felt as if she had returned to the past, back to the best time with Zhou Chengwang. "What are you thinking about?" Gu Zhe held her hand tightly. "If you don't say anything, I'll take it as a yes, right?" He held Qin Mu's hand as they walked forward. She felt like she was being protected. She turned her head and looked at the female doctor, who was still in a daze. Qin Mu suddenly stopped and said mischievously, "I'm divorced, and now I'm preparing to get married." The female doctor's face twisted. She had been slapped in the face. After Qin Mu finished speaking, she didn't feel that she had said anything outrageous. She was still smiling when they walked out, and she didn't see Gu Zhe's slightly meaningful gaze. Look at her expression. I'm dying of laughter. She must think that a divorced woman like me doesn't deserve you. Qin Mu lowered her head and smiled softly. She rarely had such a bad time. Suddenly, Gu Zhe stopped in his tracks. She was forced to stop as well. She raised her head and asked in confusion, "Gu Zhe, what's wrong? What about you? What do you think?" Gu Zhe's voice was hoarse as he asked softly. Qin Mu pursed her lips and didn't know how to answer him. "You said that you are divorced and are going to get married soon. Is that true?" Gu Zhe did not allow her to retreat. He held her chin with one hand and forced her to answer. Qin Mu bit her lip. "I just want to piss her off. I've never seen a doctor like her. She doesn't respect life at all. How can you joke about something like this?" His voice was even more hoarse, and his eyes were burning. Qin Mu wanted to step back, but he held her slender waist and said in a hoarse voice, "Tell me, Mu." Qin Mu stammered, "You said it first. But I'm not joking. I'm serious about my plan." His expression was also serious. Qin Mu was speechless for a moment and just looked at him in the hospital hall. This was indeed a good opportunity, but she was too weak and wanted to run away. In the end, he didn't want to force her, so he said lightly, "Forget it. Let's talk about it later." They walked to the elevator, but the elevator was broken, so they could only take another elevator down on the first floor. As soon as Qin Mu got out of the elevator, she saw that there was a little blood on the marble in the corridor, which had not yet dried. Qin Mu whispered, "So much blood." Chapter 2684. Gu Zhe looked at the blood and said in a low voice, "Maybe someone was injured." Qin Mu looked up and nodded. Then she walked to the parking lot with Gu Zhe. When she was about to get in the car, Qin Mu's eyes stopped. She saw Zhou Chengwang's car. It was a very low-key Land Rover, which Zhou Chengwang often drove. Was he also in the hospital now? Qin Mu pursed her lips and looked at the car. Gu Zhe naturally saw it too. He followed her gaze and said lightly, "Do you want to wait here?" Qin Mu looked away and smiled. "No need." Gu Zhe opened the car door for her. After she got in, he went around to the other side and got in. When he started the car, he looked at the car through the rearview mirror. His eyes were a little deep. Because Qin Mu insisted on going back to her apartment, he drove in the direction of her apartment. Along the way, Gu Zhe was talking about the precautions of pregnant women, but Qin Mu was always a little absent-minded. When they arrived at her apartment, Gu Zhe stopped the car and looked at her sideways. He said softly, "Mu Mu is here." She let out an "ah," and was obviously a little absent-minded. Gu Zhe smiled gently and rubbed her hair. "We're home. I'll send you up." Qin Mu shook her head. "I can go up by myself." "Gu Zhe, thank you." He put his hand on the steering wheel and said with a faint smile in his eyes, "Mu Mu, if you say thank you again in the future, I will kiss you." His voice became gentler. "I'm serious." Qin Mu looked at him and smiled helplessly. "All right." She opened the door and got out of the car. Gu Zhe watched her go upstairs and then started the car. He didn't go to the company, nor did he go home. Instead, he drove to the hospital. He guessed that it was no coincidence that Zhou Chengwang's car had appeared at the hospital. When they arrived at the hospital, Zhou Chengwang's car was still there. Gu Zhe sat in the car, her jade-like fingers gently tapping on the steering wheel. After thinking for a while, she got out of the car and walked straight to the outpatient hall. The patient's information was usually confidential, but he couldn't resist using his connections. Zhou Chengwang's identity was special, so Gu Zhe spent 2 million to buy his medical records. Half an hour later, he sat in the car with a stack of photocopies in his hand. He flipped through them page by page, and the more he read, the more shocked he became. Liver transplant. Otherwise, Zhou Chengwang would not be able to live. Was that why he gave up on Qin Mu and Shui Mu? Gu Zhe placed the document on the shelf, leaned back in his chair, and stared at it for a long time. He smoked one cigarette after another, and his eyes were a little indifferent. Qin Mu's child was Zhou Chengwang's. Zhou Chengwang probably wouldn't live long. And could he really keep Mu Mu by his side safely? when she was still in love with Zhou Chengguang. If Qin Mu loved him, then no matter whether Zhou Chengguang was dead or alive, no matter who the child was, she would be Gu Zei's woman. But no, everything belonged to Zhou Chengguang. Gu Zei, was just a person who stood in the dark and picked up the leftovers. He was so happy, but in the end, the reality was so cruel. Zhou Chengguang was cruel to himself, but he was also cruel to Gu Zei. If he died, would Gu Zei be at ease for the rest of his life if he married Qin Mu and raised their child? Chapter 2685. Gu Zei sat in the car and waited for a long time. Until tonight, Zhou Chengguang's car still hadn't been driven by anyone. He knew that he wouldn't be able to wait any longer. Since he couldn't wait any longer, he could go look for someone else. Gu Zei started the car slowly with a cold expression on his face. An hour later, the car stopped in front of the villa in Qingshui Road. This used to be Qin Mu and Zhou Chengguang's love nest. It was the place that Gu Zei was most unfamiliar with. The sports car stopped in front of the main entrance. He got out of the car and closed the door. The guard looked at him. "May I know who you're looking for?" "I'm looking for Zhou Chengguang." Gu Zei lit a cigarette and blew out a smoke ring. The guard hesitated for a long time before saying, "Vice President Zhao said that no one is allowed in. Zhou Zong needs to rest." Rest? He was waiting for death. Gu Zei sneered and held the cigarette between his fingers. "Call him on the inside. Tell him that I'm Gu Zei." The guard looked at him for a long time and finally made the call. He said carefully, "Mr. Zhou, there's a Mr. Gu looking for you. He won't say anything." The guard said something on the other end, and the guard opened the black door. As he opened it, he said, "Mr. Zhou isn't feeling well. Mr. Gu, don't disturb him for too long." Gu Zei didn't drive in. He walked in directly. The villa wasn't big, and it only took him 2 minutes to reach the main entrance. Zhou Chengguang was sitting in the hall on the first floor. He was wearing a black bathrobe. It looked a little thick in the hot weather. He sat there with a few magazines scattered around him, looking somewhat relaxed. Gu Zei walked over slowly and sat opposite him. The two men looked at each other. After a long time, Zhou Chengguang said, "Tea or coffee?" "Water is fine." Gu Zei's voice was calm. Zhou Chengguang raised his hand and called for a servant. He calmly ordered, "Go pour 2 cups of plain water." After a while, 2 cups of water were placed on the table. Gu Zei noticed that it was hot. His brows furrowed slightly. "Has it reached this point?" "Yes. I'm just waiting for the liver transplant." Zhou Chengguang smiled faintly and slowly drank the water. His expression was very calm, as if he did not care about his own illness. Gu Zei's gaze moved from his face to the cup on the table, and his voice became softer. "Why didn't you cooperate with the treatment?" He looked up again. "Why aren't you hospitalized?" "Zhou Chengguang, you didn't try your best to save your own life." Zhou Chengguang gazed into the distance, and a charming smile appeared on his face. "Gu Zei, do you know that this is my home? I don't want to leave this place. Living here, I feel at ease. Even if it's painful, I feel a sense of comfort here." Here, it seemed that Mumu could come back at any time and sleep in the bedroom upstairs. It seemed that she could come out of the bathroom at any time and complain to him. "Zhou Chengguang, I'm so tired." It also seemed that he could touch her body as soon as he stretched out his hand while lying down, even if it was air that he often caught. Zhou Chengguang smiled. His thin face was calm and handsome. Gu Zei's expression loosened. He used to look down on Zhou Chengguang. He thought that he was a creature who thought for the rest of his life, and that he was not worthy of Qin Mu. But he did not expect that he could do this for Qin Mu. This man was using death to persist in love, who said that he would die without love. Chapter 2686. If you love her so much, why would you give up and give up your own life? Gu Zei's voice was low. He reached out and tugged at him. "Come with me now. Tell Qin Mu that you want to be with her." Gu Zei wasn't a good person, but now he couldn't take it anymore. "Listen, you only have one chance. After this day, I won't give in to you anymore. Do you understand?" Gu Zei's gaze was cold. When he said these words, his entire body was cold. He wasn't a saint. He could be sad. As he said these words, his entire body was ice cold. He was not a saint, and he too would feel sad. As a patient, Zhou Chengwang was naturally no match for him, but he didn't expect Zhao Zi to come back. President Gu, you're a little ugly now. Zhao Zi smiled and walked over. It's bad enough that you're with Qin Mu, but you're also taking Zhou Chengwang into your harem. Guze was a little confused by these words. He couldn't help but let go of the water. Zhao Zi, what do you mean? That was too harsh. Zhao Zi smiled and put his arm around Zhou Chengwang's shoulder. I couldn't tell that we're together. Why don't we take a photo and upload it on Weibo tomorrow? The title will be us. What do you think, Guze? Guze was shocked. He looked at Zhou Chengwang and then looked at Zhao Zi. He still hadn't digested it. You don't understand? It's literally what it means. Chengwang and I are together, Zhao Zi said calmly. And Guze was dizzy. He didn't know what to say. He heard that people could change their sexual orientation at some point. But was it possible for Zhou Chengwang and Zhao Zi? All right, President Gu, let's not disturb the patient. I'll send you out. You have something to say to me? Zhao Zi said. Let's talk on the way. Then, he said something special. Well, I'm Chengwang's man now. If you have something to say, just talk to me. Don't bother him, okay? Guze simply couldn't listen to it anymore. Zhou Chengwang, who was behind him, was also about to vomit blood. But if he could get rid of Guze, he was still willing. He didn't care what Zhao Zi said anymore. Zhao Zi didn't care about his reputation or his face. Why would a dying man like him need these things? Thus, Zhou Chengwang calmly drank his tea while Guze watched, which further solidified the relationship between them. Guze pulled on his jacket and looked at Zhao Zi. Then let's talk outside. Zhao Zi smiled and followed him out. He even kindly handed a cigarette to Guze. Have a puff. Then, he said with some malicious intent, You're very conflicted right now, aren't you? Guze glanced at him and didn't say anything. From what he knew, Zhao Zi was even more difficult to deal with than Zhou Chengwang because he didn't have a bottom line. He would do anything sneaky. Zhao Zi stood next to him and also smoked a cigarette. He said slowly, Actually, I've been conflicted for a long time before I decided to be with Chengwang. You're lying. Guze snorted coldly. He had already woken up from the shock and wouldn't believe his bullshit. Zhao Zi smiled. You know me quite well. Then, he said softly, Take care of Qin Mu. He looked at Guze. Regardless of whether she ends up with you or not, take care of her. After all, you like her, don't you? Take it as atonement for your sister. Chapter 2687. Guze took a drag on his cigarette. What if I don't take care of him? It's up to Qin Mu. If she wants to marry you, you can marry her. Zhao Zi sounded sad. As for Chengwang, I'll take care of him. He patted Guze's shoulder. Men also have pride and dignity. Do you want him to beg Qin Mu to come back like this? Do you want her sympathy or love? Guze's hand trembled. He looked at Zhao Zi and said, Do you think I'm so great? I'm taking care of my wife and son for someone else? If you have the ability, take it away. Zhao Zi laughed. If you have the ability to take it away, I really dare to be with Zhou Chengwang. Guze had an indescribable expression on his face again. Just the thought of two men being together was enough to hurt his eyes. He snorted. You seem to be very confident. No, we have to accept fate. Zhao Zi was very calm. However, if the two of them get back together in the end, Guze, why don't we make do with each other? As he spoke, his gaze landed on Guze's face. Actually, you're not bad looking. Guze frowned. Zhao Zi, you don't really like men, do you? It's possible. Zhao Zi smiled and threw the cigarette, but on the ground. I'm not going to keep you company. Go back. Don't tell Qin Mu about Chengwang. Guze was stunned, and then he looked into the hall. Zhou Chengwang was sitting there and reading a magazine. He looked very relaxed. Zhao Zi said in a low voice, You see, he's fine now. I'll take care of him. Guze left. When he was driving, his mind was filled with Zhao Zi's words. Don't tell Qin Mu. Was he really not going to tell her? Zhou Chengwang gave up just like that? What if he told Qin Mu? He knew in his heart that Qin Mu would definitely go to see Zhou Chengwang. No matter what, it was impossible for her to be with him, even if she thought the child was his. Guze's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, and there was no expression on his face. It wasn't until the car stopped that he realized he had driven to Qin Mu's apartment. At this time, the sky was already dark. He sat in the dark car and smoked quietly. There were many times when he thought about going up to her and telling her. But every time he had this thought, Zhao Zi's words rang in his mind. He had never felt so conflicted before. Sitting there until late at night, he suddenly called Zhou Chengguang. If you're a man, then live well. When you recover, I'll tell Qin Mu who she wants to be with. It's up to her. Without waiting for Zhou Chengguang to reply, he hung up the phone. Then, he felt indescribably relaxed. He thought that he could pursue her properly. Even if she didn't choose him in the end, he wouldn't regret it. Love was about burning up the last trace of passion. Even if it turned into ashes in the end, at least it had once shone and warmed up. He wanted to be with her every day, let her happy. If she chose to be with him in the end, then he would continue to love her, and he would love her even more than before. If she chose Zhou Chengguang, he would let go. Gu Zhe smiled slightly, opened the car door, and walked towards the elevator. He used the backup car to swipe the elevator and went straight to the top floor. Chapter 2688. Can I borrow your kitchen to make supper? He asked in a low voice. Qin Mu looked at him for a long time before saying in a low voice, Did you specially come here to make it for me? I'm hungry. He smiled and entered without a trace. This was the first time he had been to her house. It was obvious that there were many luxurious items left behind by Qin Shun in the apartment. Anyone who had interacted with Qin Shun would know how exquisite his life was. On the contrary, Qin Mu, a girl, seemed to be much more ordinary. Many of the items were cheap items bought from ordinary boutiques. Although Gu Zhe could afford items like Qin Shen's, he didn't like to live in a pile of luxuries. For example, a cup of tea that cost hundreds of thousands was really unnecessary. He still liked things that were more ordinary, such as Qin Mu's habits. He quite liked them and felt very comfortable. Qin Mu didn't chase him away. She had convinced herself that he was the father of the child, so she was willing to let him in. Gu Zhe gave her a sense of security. He wasn't like Zhou Chengguang, who would go crazy at any time. He could be considered a very restrained man. She flipped her brown hair and smiled. The ingredients are in the kitchen. Go take a look yourself. Also, help me make one. I'm a little hungry. With that said, she walked to the sofa and picked up a laptop to read some information. Gu Zhe frowned. It's so late and you're still working? Also, you can't always use the computer when you're pregnant. He walked over and quickly turned off her laptop. Qin Mu raised her little face and glared at him. He smiled and pressed her shoulder. I'll go get you a glass of juice. With that said, he turned on the TV for her. You can watch this. Be good and wait. With that said, he rubbed her hair. Qin Mu smiled stiffly and didn't say anything. She watched him walk into the kitchen. To be honest, his back view was really good, slender, and well-built. Qin Mu couldn't figure it out. Gu Zhe was good-looking, had a good figure, and was rich. Why did he always pester her, a divorced woman? But now, she would not ask again. She already had a child. If he wanted to be by her side, then so be it. In the future, she would feel annoyed when she got tired of him. She felt awkward marrying Gu Zhe, although she had a child. After all, she was pregnant with this child. It would be quite embarrassing if she went back to her parents' home to be taken care of. Now, Qin Shen's big mouth should have told everyone about her pregnancy. In the afternoon, she received messages from her dear mother, father, and brother. What was worse, Cher also knew about it. Cher even asked her who the father of the child was. How could Qin Mu say that? With a vague answer, Cher yelled, It must be Zhou Chengguang, right? You must have slept with him again. I knew he was a poodle. Because of that sentence, she was in a daze for the whole afternoon. At this moment, she finally let Gu Zhe in. She didn't want to think about Zhou Chengguang all the time. Otherwise, she would feel sorry for the child in her stomach. She touched her stomach. Gu Zhe came out of the kitchen and looked at her with a burning gaze. Did the child kick you? It's only a month. How would he know how to kick? Qin Mu gestured. He's only the size of a broad bean. Gu Zhe's eyes were filled with a smile. Then, you must tell me when he's older. Chapter 2689. Qin Mu smiled faintly. All right, he put the juice in her palm. Drink it slowly. I'll make dinner. Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. When Guze went to the kitchen, she opened her notebook again and dealt with some things. She closed it before he came over. Guze asked her to eat for half an hour. Qin Mu got up and walked into the dining room. Tonight's supper was very sumptuous. She could see that he put a lot of thought into it. I only have this much food in my fridge. It's good that you can make it like this. She smiled and ate the seafood rice he made for her. The cheese on the top layer was really authentic. The bottom layer was made of mashed potatoes and tomato juice. It melted in her mouth and was very delicious. Try this lemon fish. Guze picked up a piece for her, dipped it in some juice, and put it in her bowl. Qin Mu took a bite and narrowed her eyes. It was too delicious. She was satisfied with a small bite and looked at the dish greedily. 2 bites is enough. Don't forget your current state, he said in a very euphemistic way. Qin Mu said, "Oh," but she still tasted it again and again until the fish was clean. When the feeling of vomiting came, she covered her mouth and looked at Guze innocently. Guze smiled helplessly and helped her up. He quickly and steadily took her to the sink. "You can vomit if you want." Qin Mu was a little proud. She put her hands behind her back and said in a vague voice, "You go to the side." But she couldn't wait for Guze to leave. She couldn't help but vomit. Wawa threw up his midnight snack and dinner. In the end, he almost offered his bile to the sewers. After vomiting, she felt weak all over and her face was pale. She leaned on Guze's arm and closed her eyes. "I want to lie down for a while." Guze looked at her. He was angry and amused at the same time. He also felt a little sorry for her. It was his first time taking care of a pregnant woman. The child was not his, but the woman was his. He reached out to support her and walked toward her bedroom. Not only did he help her lie down, but he also poured her a cup of hot water and helped her drink 2 mouthfuls. Then he said softly, "Rest for a while. I'll make some plain porridge for you." Qin Mu stopped him. "Guze, there's no need. Even if I eat it, I'll vomit it out. There's no need to trouble yourself." There was a faint smile on her face, and she seemed somewhat restrained. Perhaps it was because he felt guilty. Guze looked at her. "You mean, from now on, we don't have to eat, right?" He leaned forward so that the distance between them was very close. "You want to cultivate? Or a tribulation?" Qin Mu instinctively wanted to block him, but he stopped when he was 10 centimeters away from Qin Mu. She smiled awkwardly. "I don't have an appetite right now. Take a break and eat a little." As he spoke, Guze straightened his body and said meaningfully, "Children who don't eat will be punished." When he turned around, Qin Mu made a face at him. He happened to turn around and caught her childish behavior. Qin Mu squeezed out a smile. "You saw wrongly. Forget it." He snorted and walked out slowly with an ambiguous smile on his face. Qin Mu leaned against the wall, looked around, and patted her forehead. Then she looked down at her stomach. "Look, you've let a wolf into the house." Chapter 2690. In the kitchen, Guze cooked her porridge and ate some casually. Then, he cleaned up the kitchen. The kitchen was very clean, but there were traces of fire. He knew that these few days she liked to eat at home. Speaking of which, Qin Mu was a woman who was very attentive to her home and home. He didn't know why Zhou Chengwang was always running outside back then. If it were him, he would stay at home with her every day. However, he didn't know if she would give him such a chance. Originally, he thought that after having this child, she would probably choose him. Most women would be vulnerable at this time and would be dependent. But Qin Mu wasn't like that. Her dependence also seemed a little helpless. Most of their interactions came from his coercion. She had no choice but to do so. She just didn't want to fall out with him. When it came to feelings, he really couldn't see it. Guze smiled helplessly, scooped the porridge, cooled it down, and carried it to the master bedroom. Standing at the door, he was slightly stunned because Qin Mu had fallen asleep. Her head was tilted to one side. Her long brown hair covered her small face, and the phone in her hand slipped onto the quilt beside her. Guze walked over gently and placed the porridge at the head of the bed. He sat by the bed and gently lifted her long hair. Looking at her slightly pale face, he felt a little sorry for her. "Mumu." He murmured her name, his heart burning. He had never thought that one day he would be able to get so close to her. His heart was indescribably soft, and the face that he loved was right in front of him. Guze leaned over and murmured in a low voice, "Mumu." He only dared to touch her lightly and left. He looked down at the phone in her hand. Just as he was about to take it away, he found that her phone page was a phone book, and on the page that she was flipping to, there was Zhou Chengwang. No, it was not Zhou Chengwang, but her husband. Guze looked at it for a long time, his eyes a little deep. Finally, his gaze moved to her face again, and he smiled faintly. "Mumu, will there come a day when you will forget him? Did the husband column become me?" He was conflicted, but he didn't blame her. This was the difference between Guze and Guze. Guze's love was fulfilling. If her heart was always Zhou Chengwang, if Zhou Chengwang could live well, he was willing to return her to him. And these days, even if he had stolen them, he would not be able to do anything. Guze thought about it and kissed her naughtily. It would be a waste not to kiss her. He might not have such a chance in the future. Qinmu woke up and realized that he was kissing her. She blushed. "You're awake?" Guze smiled and said very naturally, "Your porridge is ready. Sit up and eat some." "Oh," Qinmu acknowledged. After he sat up, he picked up his phone and tapped a few times. She knew that he had seen it, but he didn't say anything. She wasn't with him. There was no need to explain. Qinmu felt a little disgusted. Guze looked at her and guessed what she was thinking. So he took the bowl and said, "Are you happy to be naughty?" Qinmu smiled and squinted. "Yes." She looked at him again and the spoon in his hand. "I'll eat it myself." Guze's expression was very serious. "Shouldn't you comfort my broken heart?" Qinmu stuttered. Comfort what?" Guze smiled. "You know." Chapter 2691. If you explain it now, does it mean that you have some kind of approval for me? Huh? Guze said casually and then fed her a mouthful of porridge. Qinmu didn't notice it and ate a mouthful of dog food. She was stunned and looked at Guze. "I can eat it myself. I heard that pregnant women don't have much mobility. They're like babies and need to be taken care of," Guze said calmly. Qinmu stared at him. "Who said that? Why haven't I heard of it? Didn't you hear just now?" He smiled. Qinmu continued to stare at him. He fed her another mouthful of dog food and said slowly, "Mumu, let me take care of you before the baby is born, okay?" His expression was incredibly gentle. "No one is more suitable for this role than me. I promise. I won't touch you until you're willing, okay?" Qinmu looked at him in a daze. To be honest, she didn't hate him, but she was always awkward. "Let me think about it." In the end, Qinmu sighed slightly. "Also, don't force me or I'll run away." Of course, he knew that, but it was already a good result that she was willing to think about it seriously. From that day on, Zhou Chengwang finally moved into this apartment and became a regular. Early in the morning, he would come over to make breakfast for her. Sometimes he would specially make it, and sometimes he would bring it outside. Qinmu was very picky. Sometimes he would drive for an hour to satisfy her appetite. After eating, he would drive her to the gallery and pick her up to get off work in the afternoon. After serving the pregnant woman, it was about 10 o'clock. He didn't have the good fortune to stay in the apartment. That place was Qin Shen's. Even if Qinmu didn't mind, he would feel that it was inappropriate. However, occasionally on rainy days, Qinmu would let him stay on the sofa in the living room for one night. On such a night, Guze would feel particularly warm and happy. It was raining outside at night, but in the apartment, the warm yellow light was shining, very warm and comfortable. He would read on the sofa, and Qinmu would call him if she needed anything. He was hiding this small happiness, not daring to let her know how ecstatic his heart was. In such days, he forgot the existence of Zhou Chengwang and felt that Qinmu was his woman. She was soft and gentle and fulfilled all his imaginations. Just like now, he was wrapped in a blanket, leaning against the sofa, making himself a cup of coffee and dealing with work. He had to work overtime at night to take care of her. Qinmu got up to go to the bathroom and came out to take a look. Then she smelled the coffee. She stared at the cup of coffee for more than 3 seconds. Guze smiled. "No, you can't drink it, but I really want to drink it." Qin Mu smiled, then tightened her thick bathrobe, ran to the French window, and looked out at the rainy night. Guze sat on the sofa and looked at her gently. After a long time, she said softly, "How is Shui Mu now?" Shui Mu had returned to China, and now Guze's parents were taking care of him. Guze smiled. "It's pretty good." Qin Mu's fingers gently scratched the glass. Thinking of that child, she couldn't help but think of Zhou Chengwan. She said softly, "Guze, why don't you take care of Shui Mu yourself?" Chapter 2692. She turned her face away. At that moment, the expression on her face was very rich. There was shock and a touch of helplessness. "Qin Mu, if you don't mind, I can take care of the three of you," he said in a hoarse voice. She understood what he meant, turned her head back, and looked at the dark night outside. "Guze, I don't hate Shui Mu at all. I never have," she said softly. "Take care of him. I can take care of myself." As soon as she finished speaking, he hugged her from behind. Guze hugged her very gently, and his big palm was placed on her lower abdomen, as if he was afraid of hurting her. The baby was more than 2 months old, but her belly was still flat. "Mumu, I'd rather take care of you. Together." His face was on her shoulder, and his voice was hoarse, with a unique seduction of a man. She wanted to break free, but she didn't dare to use force for fear of hurting the baby. "Don't move." His thin lips touched her neck, and his voice was very soft. "Let me hold you for a while." Qin Mu's voice was low. "Let go of me, Guze. If you do this again, our agreement will be invalid. Isn't it normal for a man to hold his girlfriend?" His voice became hoarse. "I haven't touched you these days. Mumu, you don't see me as a man, do you?" Qin Mu gave a hollow laugh. "Well, I see you as a woman." He stared at her side profile and couldn't do anything to her. Then, he bit her earlobe hard as if he was taking revenge. Qin Mu was in pain, but he bit her earlobe gently. That was the way a man treated a woman, not a girl. She knew that even if he didn't take her, he would go too far, so she began to push him. "Guze, calm down." We agreed. He gently turned her around and trapped her in his arms. He lowered his head and kissed the tip of her nose. "Let's try, huh?" "I don't want to try with you." Qin Mu turned her face away awkwardly, but he didn't allow her to escape. His voice was bewitching. "Do you not want to try with me? Or can't forget him?" She turned around and glared at him. "Guze, you bastard. I'm a bastard just because I mentioned him?" His voice was gloomy. "Do you think I can stay by your side only if I cook for you like a servant and serve you tea?" She pursed her lips. "No one forced you to do this." His gaze suddenly became passionate. He pinched her chin with his palm, but he didn't dare to use too much force. "Qin Mu, tell me, am I right? Am I just a servant in your heart?" Qin Mu's face turned red with anger. She looked up at him and said, "I don't know if you're a servant or not, but if you continue to be like this, you will be a villain." The muscles on Guze's face twitched violently. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Qin Mu, I'm sorry." Qin Mu turned her face away uncomfortably. "Guze, go find a woman. You probably have too many hormones." He hadn't expected her to say that. This heartless woman. He had endured it for 8 years, and now all he wanted was a kiss, but she told him to find someone else. Guze was angry and amused at the same time. The forced feelings just now were gone. At this moment, he just wanted to bite her hard to vent his anger. Chapter 2693. Qin Mu bit her lip. "Guze, don't be like this." But how could she stop him? So she bit and kissed again and again, and slowly, her tone changed. Guze's voice was full of temptation. "Mumu, let's try. I'll just kiss and not do anything else." Qin Mu sobered up a little and immediately turned her face to the side. "Guze, I'm pregnant." "You can kiss when you're pregnant." He knew that she was evading, but he knew that if he didn't force her now, he would still be her servant who cooked for her in 8 to 10 years. Qin Mu was gentle, but she would play dumb, and her acting was often very hurtful. Just as Guze was about to kiss her, the door of the apartment was opened. Qin Shin stood at the door of his apartment and saw a man about to kiss his sister. He knew the man, but Qin Mu was obviously unwilling. Was he trying to force himself on her? Qin Mu put her suitcase aside and put her hands in front of her. She looked like she was watching a good show. Mr. Gu, you seem to be in a good mood. Does my place look like a crime scene? Gu Zhe was in a sorry state. It was the most sorry state he had ever been in his life. In terms of sharp-tongued, few people he knew could match up to Qin Shen. His behavior now made him seem like a shady person. Fortunately, Qin Mu had been taken care of by him for so long, so she was too embarrassed to fall out with him. She smiled and said, "It's not that serious." She looked at Gu Zhe. "Qin Shen is back. It's not convenient for you to stay here. The rain is not too heavy outside. Be careful on the road." Gu Zhe's heart, which was a little cold, felt a little warm. He looked at Qin Mu and knew what she meant by her words. "You're not just my servant." Qin Mu smiled slightly. "You're someone I have to consider seriously, but don't force me too much. I can't accept what happened today." Gu Zhe just ruffled her long hair. "I scared you." "Not really. I just don't like it," Qin Mu said in a low voice. Then she took his coat and gave it to him. "Put on your clothes. I'll walk you to the door." Gu Zhe's gaze grew gentler and gentler. Qin Shen, on the other hand, was shocked. Was there really a relationship between his little sister and Gu Zhe? Looking at the wolf in love and the girl in love, he wasn't forced? If he hadn't come back just now, would they have that? However, Qin Shen was a very open-minded person and would not meddle in other people's business. He just watched as Gu Zhe and Qin Mu went out together, and he went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. In front of the elevator, Qin Mu and Gu Zhe stood side by side. Gu Zhe ran his fingers through his hair. "Sorry, no need." Qin Mu hugged her body and looked at the number on the elevator. She said again, "Drive slowly back." He lowered his head and looked at her little face. "Do you care about me?" "The child's father," Qin Mu said with a smile. She poked his heart with her little hand and said, "Do it again." "No, there won't be a next time." Gu Zhe grabbed her little hand and said in a hoarse voice, "What is this? Are you comforting me?" "Well, I guess so." She admitted it. Then she stood on tiptoe and kissed him on the lips. Only a second later, she left. "Will this make you a little more confident?" "Every day?" he asked greedily. Qin Mu smiled. "It depends on my mood." Then, she restrained her expression and said in a low voice, "Gu Zhe, I'm not cold-hearted, but I need time. I'll probably make a decision when the child is born." "Okay." He looked at her and lowered his voice. "I'll wait, and I'm sorry about today." Chapter 2694. Qin Mu smiled and didn't say anything. The elevator happened to arrive at this moment. Gu Zhe didn't go in immediately. Instead, he looked at Qin Mu and said, "I'm leaving." Qin Mu said, "Good night." She was there so softly that he couldn't bear to leave for a moment. Finally, he went forward and hugged her gently. Qin Mu didn't avoid him. Gu Zhe murmured, "I'll pick you up and bring you to my place tomorrow." It was really too inconvenient here. After Qin Shen came back, Qin Mu didn't refuse. She just smiled and said, "Qin Shen just came back. I want to talk to him more." Gu Zhe was a little sad, but he still did as she said. Qin Mu watched him enter the elevator and then walked back. Qin Shen had already taken a shower and changed into a set of clothes. He poured himself a glass of red wine and held it as he watched Qin Mu walk in. "You changed to a new man?" Qin Shen's eyes were smiling. Qin Mu glanced at him and asked, "What do you mean by changed?" She lowered her head and looked at her lower abdomen. She said softly, "I'm pregnant. The father of the child is Gu Zhe." Qin Shen took a sip of the wine elegantly and smiled meaningfully. "I didn't know that you were so obedient. The child is Gu Zhe's? Then you two are really compatible." Qin Mu glared at him, but she couldn't stop him from talking. "Have you thought about it?" Qin Shen smiled faintly. "I can guarantee that Gu Zhe will never cheat. Even if you want to divorce him, you can't find a reason." Qin Mu frowned. "Qin Shen, what are you trying to say?" Qin Shen smiled in an extremely unrestrained manner. "I mean, what if one day you want to be with Zhou Chengwang again? Gu Zhe is like a sticky candy that you can't get rid of. What should you do then?" Qin Mu looked at him. "That's impossible." She sat on the sofa and wrapped herself in a blanket. "Qin Shen, it's all in the past. Now that I'm pregnant, it's even more impossible." Perhaps the appearance of this child signified their impossibility. Qin Mu was in a daze as she stared blankly ahead. Qin Shan went to the kitchen to make a glass of milk for her and placed it in front of her. He picked up the wine glass and smiled as he said, "Anything is possible. Have you ever thought that you would be with Guze before?" Qin Mu frowned again. "I haven't been with him yet. You already have a child, and you're saying that you haven't been together?" Qin Shan smiled. "Don't say that you haven't known each other deeply." The words "know each other deeply" still made Qin Mu blush slightly. "I don't remember." She sighed softly and told him about Gu Mei. Qin Shan's expression was rarely exaggerated. He held the wine glass, looked at Qin Mu, and smiled. "You didn't even feel it. How can you be sure that this child is Guze's, and not Tom, Dick, or Harry's?" Qin Mu brushed her hair uncomfortably. "When I woke up, I was hugging Guze, she said with great difficulty. We weren't wearing clothes." Qin Shan couldn't stop laughing. "Did you feel it? You didn't know when we were having sex, did you?" Qin Mu swallowed hard. "Should I rely on Guze now?" He said that the child was his. It was better than saying that it was an unknown stranger. Qin Shan smiled faintly. "It doesn't matter who the child is. What matters is who you like." Chapter 2695. Sure enough, Qin Mu was a little stunned. Then, she looked at Qin Shan and said, It's better if you don't come back." Qin Shan smiled and said, "Sorry, I have half a year's vacation." "Is it so easy to take leave in the United States?" Qin Mu clenched her fists angrily. Qin Shan's smile deepened. "Because the laboratory is my own. I could take as long as I want." Qin Mu couldn't talk to him anymore. The gallery was also hers. Why did she have to work like a slave, even when she was pregnant? Qin Shan probably saw through her thoughts and smiled. "When you can learn to be as shameless and coquettish as Cher, you can be free." He said coldly, "Isn't Guze pursuing you? Why don't you use such a good resource?" Qin Mu lowered her head and said very softly, "Qin Shan, I actually seriously consider him." "It's good that you are serious." Qin Shan smiled. "I'm just afraid that you won't be serious." As he said that, he got up and said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early. I'll send you to the gallery tomorrow." Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. Qin Shan's return indeed made her heave a sigh of relief. She was seriously considering Guze, but if the two of them were together for too long, she was afraid that her choice would be a compromise and become a kind of favor. That night, Qin Mu didn't sleep well. She kept thinking about what Qin Shan said. "You did it with Guze. Do you feel anything? Are you sure that the father of the child is Guze?" In fact, she was very sure at first, but now that Qin Shan said that, she wasn't so sure. Perhaps at 4 months, she should do an amniocentesis to confirm the DNA. Although Qin Shan said that it didn't matter who the child belonged to, Qin Mu wasn't a person who wanted to live a muddle-headed life for the rest of her life. If the child belonged to Guze, it would be the same as now. If it wasn't, she wouldn't consider Guze. The reason was that he had lied. She didn't sleep well that night. In the morning, she got up with dark circles under her eyes to brush her teeth and wash her face. When she changed her clothes and walked out, Qin Shan had already prepared breakfast. Qin Shan's taste was extremely exquisite. Even his breakfast was like a work of art. Qin Mu ate the toast and suspected that it was cut by Qin Shan's scalpel. However, she ate and didn't say anything. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to find such an expensive nanny. Qin Shan had the habit of drinking coffee early in the morning. He held the mug in his beautiful hand and sipped the coffee. Beside him was a financial newspaper. Then he laughed. "Glory! Has it been taken over by Zhao Zi? Big and small, it's always him. Has Zhou Chengwang become a monk?" Qin Mu almost spat out the milk in her mouth. She looked at Qin Shan with a trace of resentment in her eyes. Then, she picked up the newspaper and looked at it. She read the words on the square clearly, and then she was a little stunned. It seemed that she hadn't heard from Zhou Chengwang for a long time. Could it be that something happened to him? Qin Shan waved 2 fingers in front of her and said with a smile, "Last night, someone said that she was seriously considering Guze. Now, she's worried about her ex-husband." "Huh?" Qin Mu pursed her lips. Qin Shan. I'm a little worried. We left that day. He didn't look good. He gave up Shuemu and her. Did he give up glory too? Chapter 2696. Qin Mu was stunned. Qin Shun smiled. But if you don't care about him at all, then it doesn't matter. Just let him run his own course. Qin Mu's lips moved slightly. Qin Shun curled his lips and looked at her lightly. After a long time, Qin Mu finally said in a low voice, Qin Shun, I want to go and have a look. Okay. Qin Shun smiled slightly and suddenly asked, Do you know where he is? Qin Mu pursed her lips. In the villa we used to live in. It seems that you know each other. Qin Shun smiled gently and then looked at her. Do you know why I came back? Qin Shun got up, took his laptop, and opened a series of databases in front of her. I found this. After saying that, he showed the files to Qin Mu. She believed that Qin Mu could bear it. Because she was a mother now, nothing could overwhelm her. However, she didn't expect that when Qin Mu saw the files, her tears fell down. Unexpectedly, tears fell down one by one. Qin Shun also felt a little sad. He took a tissue and wiped Qin Mu's tears. Don't cry. Go if you want to. Qin Mu looked at Qin Shun. Qin Shun smiled. I'll take you there. Qin Mu was stunned for a long time and suddenly said, Did you come back because of Zhou Chongwang? Yes, idiot. Qin Shun knocked her head. There is an idiot who is well taken care of. What should I worry about? At worst, I will marry someone else with my ex-husband's child. Qin Mu was stunned. You are not stupid. You just refuse to accept this fact. You would rather think that the person you have sex with is Gu Zhe, right? Qin Shun smiled. So there are so many flaws in it, but you still easily believe Gu Zhe's words. Qin Mu, you have been hypnotizing yourself. Qin Mu closed her eyes slightly. Take me to him. Qin Shun got up, took her hand, and walked out together. In the car, he handed her the tissue box. Cry if you want. It's normal for a pregnant woman to cry. Qin Mu's eyes were slightly red, and then she turned her face away awkwardly. I'm not in a hurry. Although she said that she was not in a hurry, she cried out, Qin Shun, you must have a way to save him, right? As Qin Shun started the car, he said, Qin Mu, I have checked. Zhou Chongwang did not apply for a liver source from the World Hospital Organization. So, I said that he gave up on himself. Qin Mu was still in a daze, and her fingernails deeply sank into her flesh. Last night, she was still thinking about Gu Zhe, and now she was willing to risk her life for Zhou Chongwang. But she knew that the instinctive reaction was what her heart wanted. She even suspected that even if the child was Gu Zhe's, her final choice might not necessarily be Gu Zhe. If something really happened to Zhou Chongwang, she tightened her lips and didn't say anything. She thought of the way Zhou Chongwang looked when he left that day. He must have known it long ago, or he just found out. And he saved Shuemu that day, so the scene of that day emerged in her mind. In fact, Qin Shun was right. She had been running away. She subconsciously knew that it was Zhou Chongwang that day, but she deliberately ignored it. She made herself think that it was Gu Zhe. Chapter 2697. Qin Shun smiled faintly. This is a normal reaction. There's no need to blame yourself. Qin Mu, I've already applied for a liver source. It may not be available soon, but if I apply now, the chances will be much higher. Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. When Qin Shun's sports car drove to the villa, Zhao Zi was also looking for Zhou Chongwang. Zhou Chongwang had disappeared. Just last night, he left the villa with only a small suitcase. The guard said that he was going out for a few days. But Qin Mu knew that he wouldn't be gone for a few days. He must have left. Maybe he had left the city, or maybe he had gone abroad. I've checked immigration. He didn't leave the country. Zhao Zi sighed. He picked up his phone and kept calling people to find Zhou Chongwang. The last call was to Lan Yu's phone. Lan Yu were in a hotel, so there might be some clues. When Qin Shun heard Lan Yu's voice, his expression loosened slightly, but he quickly returned to normal. Zhao Zi looked around, but didn't find any clues. He let out a long sigh. I'll go out and look again to see if his mother's house is there. Wait a minute. Qin Mu stopped him and then asked softly, Is his car in the hospital? She remembered that there was a pool of blood on the ground in the hospital that day. Zhou Chongwang's car was also in the parking lot. It had been so many days. Was it still there? If not, did he drive it away? Zhao Zi pursed his thin lips. I'll go and see it now. Qin Mu immediately said, I'll go too. Qin Shen opened the car door and let her get in. Less than an hour later, they stood in the parking lot of the city hospital. Zhou Chengwang's car was no longer there. A white BMW was parked there. However, Qin Mu's gaze fell on the cement floor. There was a small pool of blood there. She slowly squatted down and touched it with her hand. It was still wet. He just left. Her voice was slightly tense. Zhao Zi immediately walked toward the building. I'll go check the surveillance footage. As for Qin Mu, he stood there and looked around. She wanted to find him. Perhaps he hadn't left yet. Perhaps he wasn't feeling well and had stopped at the intersection. However, after searching all over the place, the car was nowhere to be found. Zhao Zi checked the surveillance footage and saw that Zhou Chengwang's car had left 10 minutes ago. That was why the blood on the ground hadn't dried yet. Qin Mu stood in the parking lot and murmured, Why did he leave? Why did he leave? Zhao Zi said softly, I called Qin Shen that day. He might have heard it. Qin Shen shrugged. You're too careless. Qin Mu lowered her head. Does he not want to see me that much? She placed her hand on her abdomen and asked softly, Zhao Zi, is my child Zhou Chengwang's? Zhao Zi pursed his lips and looked at Qin Shen. Then his gaze fell on Lan Yu, who was rushing over. Qin Shen was a little confused. Why did he look for this idiot? What could a vegetable do? Lan Yu closed the car door, and his gaze fell on Qin Shen's face. He said to Zhao Zi, I've checked all the hotel records. There's no information on Zhou Chengwang's check-in. Of course, I'll ask someone to keep an eye on it. Zhao Zi nodded. Thank you. Then, he looked at Qin Mu and said bitterly, Then, who do you want this child to be? Qin Mu was stunned for a moment. Who did she want it to be? At this moment, she actually wanted it to be Zhou Chengwang's. Chapter 2698. She couldn't answer Zhao Zi's words, at least not now. If she wanted to answer, she would rather say it in front of Zhou Chengwang. Actually, Qin Shen was right. It didn't matter who the child belonged to. What mattered was who she loved in her heart. Please forgive her selfishness. If Zhou Chengwang was fine, she would really let it go. But now that he was like this, she couldn't let it go no matter what. Qin Mu suddenly laughed. She cried and laughed. She said loudly to the surroundings, Zhou Chengwang, where are you? Where are you? Why are you hiding? Qin Shen said that you gave up on yourself, but I don't believe it. I don't believe that you are so great. You have always been so selfish. Zhou Chengwang, come out. I promise, I won't cry for you. I will only slap you. Qin Mu cried so hard that she couldn't control herself. However, she couldn't do anything to him. She still cried, but she wouldn't cry in front of him. She definitely wouldn't. She would really slap him as long as he dared to appear. But she called for so long and cried for so long, but he didn't appear. Qin Shen came over and patted her shoulder. His voice was very gentle. Don't cry. He's not here. He can't hear you even if you cry. Why don't you save your strength and give him 2 hard slaps when you see him? Qin Mu rested her head on his shoulder and bit her lip. Qin Shen, where do you think he will go? He will probably stay in B City. He won't be willing to leave, Qin Shen said with certainty. Thinking about it, Qin Mu was pregnant. How could he bear to leave? No matter who the child belonged to, Zhou Chengwang should know that the child was his, so he had to see the child born. This was Qin Shen's deduction. If it wasn't Zhou Chengwang's, her name would be written backwards. Think about it. If the child wasn't Zhou Chengwang's, he didn't have to run away. Wasn't he just sick? He was just feeling guilty. When he had sex with Qin Mu, Gumei was still alive. It was morally unacceptable for him to do that. Even if he was forced, it was also possible that he was thinking for Qin Mu and was afraid that Qin Mu would feel bad. He put his arm around Qin Mu and walked slowly to the car. Lan Yu stopped him and chuckled. I'll let you know if there's any news. Qin Shen glanced at him. Just tell Zhao Zi. Lan Yu revealed a gentle smile. I don't have much in common with him. Sorry, I don't have anything in common with you. Qin Mu rolled her eyes at him and got into the car. Before he could close the door, Lan Yu held the door and looked at him with a burning gaze. Lan Yu's voice was low. When you called me a vegetable before, you didn't feel like you didn't have anything in common with me. Dr. Chin, or do you like to communicate with vegetables? Then, you wouldn't mind becoming a vegetable again. Lanyu thought viciously. Chin Shun pursed her lips and glared at Lanyu. She saw his viciousness, so she sneered and closed the door without saying anything. Lanyu cried out in pain. His hand was pressed down. Chin Shun opened the door again and smiled at him. If you want to be a vegetable, stand in front of the car, and I will fulfill your wish immediately. Lanyu's face darkened. Although he knew that Chin Shun had a sharp tongue, he was still angered to new heights every time. Chapter 2699. Zhao Zi walked over and looked at Lanyu. Did you just say that we don't have anything in common? Lanyu patted the wrinkles on his clothes and glanced at him. Do you think so? Zhao Zi nodded. Actually, I think so too. Think about it. I like women and you like men. Tell me, we have different sexual orientations. How could we have anything in common? This time, Lanyu's face was completely dark. He was especially annoyed. He was here to help. So why was the whole world so hostile towards him? He wrinkled his nose and got into his car to leave. Zhao Zi also left. The cars drove off one after another, and the parking lot became quiet again. After a minute or so, a man in a black hooded trench coat walked out from a dark hallway. He walked out and quietly looked at the entrance of the parking lot with a hint of pain on his face. He knew that Qin Mu knew the truth. However, he could not face her. He stood for a long time and smoked 2 cigarettes. Then, he carried a small duffel bag and walked out of the hospital. He went to a small soup kitchen. There was no need for identification there, but the conditions were a little bad. A woman in her 40s led him into the dark corridor. The stairs creaked when he stepped on them. If he did not come here himself, Zhou Chengwang would not have known that there was such a place in B City. The woman stopped at the door of a room and opened the door for him. Instantly, a moldy smell rushed out from the door. Zhou Chengwang frowned, but still walked in. The wooden floor creaked as he walked. There were 1 or 2 pieces that were empty. There was a big hole there, and it looked dilapidated. The woman said apologetically, "I'll fill it up with bricks later. Mr. Zhou, this is the best room left. It's 200 yuan a night. If you have decided, you can pay the deposit." Zhou Chengwang took out about 10,000 yuan from his wallet and gave it to her. "I'll stay for a month, and 3 meals will be included. It's fine as long as it's simple." The woman's wrinkled face immediately relaxed, and then she smiled. "Mr. Zhou, you're really generous. Thank you so much. Also, I like silence. Other than delivering food, don't disturb me. Don't insert any advertisements either." Zhou Chengwang coughed violently. The woman's heart ached for him. "Mr. Zhou, I won't. You don't look very well, and you're still recuperating. How can you get yourself some messy women? It'll be too troublesome." The more the woman talked, the more excited Zhou Chengwang became. He waved his hand and said, "You may leave." The woman's face stiffened. "Gosh, Mr. Zhou is so cool. Just now, he had the aura of a CEO. Mr. Zhou, you must have been an actor before. You've acted as a CEO before?" The woman laughed. How could the CEO possibly stay in this shabby house of hers? Just this house alone cost 100 yuan a day. It was in a good location, but there was no sunlight all day long. There was only a bed and a table in the house. It was about 10 square meters. Mr. Zhou was very generous, and his clothes looked very expensive. He didn't look like someone who lived here, but it was fine if he lived here. She would go back and count the money. The woman twisted her waist and walked away. She turned back and winked at him. "Mr. Zhou, I'll deliver food in 2 hours. Don't go away. I'll deliver it personally." Zhou Chengwang saw the flash in her eyes and coughed. "All right, you may leave." Chapter 2700. The woman closed the door and muttered to herself, "He's really good-looking, but he doesn't seem to be in good health." She raised the money in her hand and looked at it one by one with a particularly happy expression. Zhou Chengwang, who was inside the door, slowly pushed open the window of the room. In fact, it was only a small 2-pane window, only the size of 2 notebooks. When the window was open, dust blew in his face. Zhou Chengwang choked and coughed violently again. After that, he raised his eyes and looked at the skyscraper in front of him. That was the apartment where Chinmu lived. On the top floor of that building, Chinmu lived. When night fell, the lights there would illuminate the entire night. Zhou Chongwang smiled slightly. The wind outside the window blew in, carrying bursts of heat waves. Only then did he feel that this hotel was really simple and crude. It didn't even have an air conditioner. However, he didn't care so much. Even if such a place was installed, it probably wouldn't be much more comfortable. He would stay here for as long as he could. Facing the wind, he lit a cigarette and continued to stare at the building quietly. Was Mumu very sad now? She would still be sad for him. This fool wasn't worth it. He had lied to her so many times and broken her heart so many times. Her happiness was clearly in front of her. If she was smart, she would be with Guze. Guze could give her everything a woman should have: wealth, a handsome and healthy husband, loyalty, and children. Why was she so stupid? Why did she still look for him? Even if he found a liver source, he couldn't rule out whether he could survive. If the liver was rejected, she would still be sad in the end. It was better to be selfish and let her be with Guze. Zhou Chongwang smoked slowly and coughed after a while. However, after coughing, he continued to smoke. However, on the windowsill, he saw some blood on the dust over there. He was stunned for a moment and then smiled in relief. At this point, a little better or a little worse didn't make any difference. After smoking a cigarette, he went to pack his luggage, but when he took out his shirt, he found that there was no closet for him to hang his clothes in, so he had to put the shirt back into his luggage. He lit a cigarette and held it in one hand. He took the key left by the landlady on the table and went out. He bought some daily necessities at a grocery store in the alley. It was the first time for Zhou Chongwang to buy these things, so he couldn't help but ask a few questions. The young woman who was selling these things looked at him 8 or 10 times with a red face and a delicate voice. Zhou Chongwang slowly noticed that and really wanted to ask her if she was sick. With a cigarette in his hand and a bunch of cheap goods in his hand, he slowly walked toward the charity shop. The landlady stood at the door and watched. She turned her head and smiled. "Mr. Zhou, if you want to hang up your clothes, I'll ask my husband to help you pull a strong rope. Your room has a small bathroom, so it's quite convenient. This kind of suite is very reasonable in our area." Zhou Chongwang smoked and looked at her faintly, which made the landlady happy. She shook her body and looked at the young woman at the entrance of the alley. Now, the more she looked at this surnamed Zhou, the more she felt that he had a bearing. He was probably very capable in the past, but now he was just down and out. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.